Well, good evening once again. Stronger protections for domestic violence survivors. That's what a local mother and daughter want to create with a new online petition.
Yeah, the family now calling on lawmakers to pass Hudson's Law, named for a Buffalo mother who was shot and killed earlier this month. Tonight, the man accused of killing Keaira Hudson is behind bars, being held without bail since his arrest last Wednesday. Adam Bennefield is charged with second-degree murder and endangering the welfare of children. Investigators say he shot Hudson, seen here in her SUV earlier this month, while her kids were with her. Our 7 News I-team was the first to discover just 24 hours before Hudson's murder. Authorities had Bennefield in custody and charged him for assaulting Hudson, but a judge let him go because the charges did not qualify for bail in New York.
October 5th, 2022. It was just after 8:30 in the morning. A school day, a quiet street. She buckled her baby in the back seat, not knowing it would be her last goodbye. She had tried to protect herself. She wore a bulletproof vest. She had begged the police to listen. She had prayed that someone would stop him, but no one came. On the corner of Richlawn and Shawnee in Buffalo, New York, a mother was executed in front of her 3 children. Her body fell beside the car. The engine was still running. The door hung open. He didn't run. He didn't hide, because he didn't expect to be stopped. Was it love turned rage? A jealous obsession? Or was this the final step in a plan that began the day she said no more?
Welcome to Twisted Crimes Files, where the darkest truths come to light. Stay with us for chilling stories you won't forget, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a case.
Before her name became a headline, before her last moments played out on a quiet Buffalo street, she was simply Keaira. Keaira Hudson was 30 years old, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a mother to 3 children who were the center of her world. Her life revolved around them. Early mornings with bottles and backpacks, late nights with bedtime stories and whispered prayers. She had a smile that could light up a room, the kind of laugh that made other people laugh, even if they didn't know the joke. In photos, she's often mid-laugh, eyes crinkled, arms wrapped around her children. There is no trace of the storm she was weathering in private. Keaira had dreams, some big, some small. She wanted stability for her children. She wanted a home that felt safe, where the walls didn't echo with shouting or threats. She wanted to build something of her own, to work, to provide, to see her kids grow up without the shadows she had learned to live with. Those closest to her describe her as strong-willed and fiercely protective. She was the type to defend her friends, to speak up when something felt wrong, even if it made her unpopular. In the face of difficulty, she held her head high. But strength doesn't erase fear. And over time, fear began creeping into her everyday life, quiet, persistent, and impossible to ignore. By the fall of 2022, Keaira's reality was split in two. On the surface, there were Instagram posts of smiling children, holiday outfits, playful videos. Behind closed doors, there was a man she had once trusted who now controlled and terrorized her. In the weeks leading up to her death, that fear became visible. Her sister remembers her showing up in a bulletproof vest. Not for a joke, not for attention, but because she believed it was the only thing standing between her and the grave. And yet, even in those moments, she was still trying to live her life, still showing up for her children, still holding on to the possibility that she could break free. On October 4th, 2022, just one day before her murder, she had already taken steps to protect herself. She had called for help. She had endured the humiliation of reporting the violence she endured, telling her story to strangers in uniform, trusting they would keep her safe. She could not have known that by sunrise the next morning, she would be back in the same danger she had fought to escape. Keaira was more than the way she died. She was a woman with a voice, a heart, a family, and a future she was trying desperately to protect. And to understand the outrage and heartbreak her death caused, you have to know who she was before that final morning. This was Keaira, a mother who carried her children in her arms and the weight of fear on her back. When Keaira first met Adam Bennefield, he wasn't the man the headlines would later describe. He was charming, at least on the surface. The kind of man who could make a stranger feel like an old friend within minutes. He smiled easily, spoke softly, carried himself with quiet confidence. For a woman trying to build a stable future for her children, that confidence felt like security. Adam knew how to present himself. He could be attentive, generous, even gentle when it served his purpose. In those early days, he seemed to offer the safety and companionship she wanted. Friends remember seeing them together, sharing meals, laughing at inside jokes, looking like any other couple trying to make it work. But appearances are fragile, and behind closed doors, cracks began to show. There were flashes of temper, moments when his voice would rise, when his words would cut sharp. Small acts of control slipped into everyday life. Who she talked to, where she went, what she wore. Those small controls became bigger ones. Arguments that lasted hours. Silent treatments that stretched for days. Apologies that came too late, always followed by promises that things would change. In the cycle of abuse, the abuser often plays two roles, the comfort and the chaos. And Adam knew how to switch between them with precision. As time passed, those moments of charm became rare. The kindness faded, replaced by intimidation, by threats, by physical violence that no one outside the home could see. Yet in public, they could still look like a couple. They shared family gatherings. They appeared together at events. On the surface, there were smiles and posed photographs. Underneath, there was fear. By October 2022, Keaira wasn't just dealing with emotional harm. She was living in survival mode. The man she once trusted with her heart had become the man she feared with her life. And that fear wasn't unfounded. On October 4th, the day before she was killed, Adam was arrested for brutally attacking her. Police charged him, but by that same evening, he was free. The next morning, that freedom would become a death sentence. Adam Bennefield was no longer just the man she married. He had become the threat she couldn't escape. And when he stepped out of that truck on Shawnee and Richlawn Avenues, shotgun in hand, it was the final, irreversible proof of what she had known all along. The danger wasn't somewhere out there. It was the man she had once let into her life. In domestic violence cases, the hours before a killing often hold the clearest signs of what's to come. In Keaira's case, those hours were packed with warnings, each one ignored. October 3rd, 2022, 2 days before the murder. The cracks in her marriage had long since split open. That day, neighbors reported hearing shouting from the home Keaira once shared with Adam. It wasn't unusual for them, the raised voices, the arguments spilling into the street. But this time it felt different, more urgent, more dangerous. Inside, Keaira was weighing her choices. Stay quiet and hope it blows over, or speak out and risk making it worse. She'd chosen silence before, but with her children watching, she knew she couldn't keep pretending. She began quietly reaching out to family, telling them she felt unsafe, telling them she believed Adam was capable of killing her. October 4th, 2022, 1 day before the murder. The breaking point came. Adam attacked her. Not just words, not just intimidation, but a brutal physical assault. According to police reports later entered into evidence, he punched and kicked her, leaving visible injuries. This wasn't the first time, but it was the one that finally pushed her to call for help. That call led to his arrest. Officers placed him in custody. Keaira, still shaken, began to believe she might finally have a few days of peace. She knew there was an order of protection. She thought he would be held, at least overnight. But within hours, Adam was free. The same day, the system that promised her safety sent him back into the same streets she traveled, the same neighborhoods where her children played. And she knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before he found her. That evening, her sister saw her wearing a bulletproof vest. Not as a joke, not for show. She wore it in the house. She wore it in the car. She was making food for her kids with a Kevlar plate beneath her sweater. She told her family, "If something happens, tell my kids I love them." October 5th, 2022, the day of the murder. The morning began like any other, at least for her children. Breakfast, getting dressed, strapping the baby into the car seat. She was driving them to school and daycare, trying to keep the routine intact. But Adam was already out there. Prosecutors believe he tracked her movements that morning. Whether it was through watching her home, following her car, or simply knowing her routine, the result was the same. Around 8:30 a.m., he spotted her on Shawnee Avenue. Witnesses later told police they saw the truck close in. They saw the sudden swerve, the impact, the silver car jolting forward. The children inside began crying. Keaira's hands gripped the wheel. But before she could process what was happening, Adam was out of the truck and moving toward her, a shotgun in his hands. 3 blasts in quick succession. It took less than a minute for everything to end. Aftermath, the hours immediately following. Adam called 911. He didn't wait for help. He left. The children were pulled from the car by bystanders, their cries echoing through the street. The bulletproof vest she'd worn was no match for the weapon he'd chosen. Later, police and prosecutors would point to this sequence of events: the prior assault, the arrest and release, the protective order, as a textbook example of escalation. Each event pushed closer to the inevitable. This wasn't a sudden explosion of anger. It was a chain reaction that had been building for days, maybe months. And every link in that chain was visible if anyone had been willing to act. It was just after 8:30 on the morning of October 5th, 2022. The streets of Buffalo were busy with the usual morning traffic. Parents driving children to school, buses stopping at corners, neighbors walking their dogs. Keaira's silver sedan moved steadily along Shawnee Avenue. In the back seat, her 2 older children sat buckled in, their voices soft over the hum of the engine. The infant slept in the car's seat, swaddled against the cool air. She wore her bulletproof vest, not out of paranoia, but because the threat was real. She had seen Adam's face in her mind all night. The memory of the attack the day before was still raw. The way his hands had struck her, the sound of his voice when he threatened her. The vest was her last layer of control in a situation where she had almost none. And then, the truck appeared, a dark pickup closing in from behind. It accelerated, closing the distance until there was no space left. Then, with deliberate force, it rammed the back of her car. The sound was sharp, metal crumpling, glass cracking. The sedan jolted forward, throwing the children against their seatbelts. Before she could react, the driver's side door of the truck swung open. Adam stepped out. His movements were quick but controlled. He wasn't running. He wasn't yelling. He was focused. In his hands, a shotgun. He walked directly toward her driver's side door. In those seconds, Keaira had nowhere to go. She was boxed in by traffic, her children strapped in behind her, the truck still blocking her rear. The first blast shattered the driver's side glass. The second tore through the bulletproof vest, striking her in the chest. The third was the one that ended it. In less than a minute, it was over. The children were screaming, their small hands pressed to their ears, their eyes fixed on their mother slumped forward over the wheel. Her body was still, the red pooling against the fabric of her clothes. Adam turned away and walked back to his truck. He climbed inside, closed the door, and drove off. He didn't call for help. He didn't look back. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the children crying. A neighbor ran from her porch, calling 911. Others stood frozen on the sidewalk, unable to process what they had just seen. The bulletproof vest she had trusted could not protect her from the man she had once trusted most. By the time the sirens approached and the first officers arrived, the shooter was gone. The children were pulled from the car and taken into the arms of strangers. And Keaira, 30 years old, mother of 3, was declared dead at the scene. After the final gunshot, after the chaos he had created in broad daylight, Adam Bennefield did not stay. He did not try to help the woman he had just shot, the woman who had once shared his home, his bed, his children's trust. He turned his back on the scene, climbed into his pickup truck, and drove away. No call to 911, no word of family, no surrender. Instead, he began moving through the city like nothing had happened. Investigators would later piece together his route from witness statements and security camera footage. He avoided the most obvious roads. He didn't rush. The calmness of his escape disturbed even seasoned detectives. Within hours, he was seen at locations that had nothing to do with turning himself in. No meeting with an attorney. No attempt to negotiate with police. He was moving like a man who believed he could buy himself time, maybe even get away entirely. As officers began searching, his name and face were already circulating through law enforcement channels. Patrol cars in Buffalo and surrounding towns were on alert. Every nearby agency was watching for the dark pickup with damage to its front end. Meanwhile, back on Shawnee and Richlawn, the scene remained sealed off. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind. Detectives documented everything: the angle of the car, the shattered driver's side glass, the fragments of shotgun shell casings scattered on the pavement. Every piece of evidence told the same story. This was no accident. Still, Adam was nowhere to be found. The hours stretched on. For Keaira's family, each minute felt like proof that the system had failed them twice. First by releasing him after the assault, and now by letting him vanish after the murder. At one point, Adam's behavior after the killing mirrored the kind of detachment prosecutors would later use to paint him as calculating. He didn't go into hiding in the woods or run to another state. He stayed close enough to watch the reaction, to see the headlines, to hear the fear in the community. When police finally caught up to him, it wasn't because he turned himself in. It was because the trail of evidence, the witnesses, the cameras, the vehicle damage, had made his world smaller by the hour. By then, the public narrative was already clear. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment act. It was the continuation of a pattern, one that began long before October 5th and ended only when law enforcement put him in handcuffs. His calm after the killing wasn't the calm of remorse. It was the calm of a man who believed he had done exactly what he set out to do. When Adam Bennefield was finally taken into custody, there was no drama, no high-speed chase, no exchange of words. Just the quiet, heavy sound of handcuffs closing. The community that had been watching in fear for days felt a flicker of relief. But for Keaira's family, there was no celebration. His arrest did not bring her back. And for them, the real question was whether the system that had already failed her twice would find a way to fail her again. From the moment prosecutors announced the charges, murder in the second degree, aggravated criminal contempt, and 3 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, there was no denying the stakes. The murder charge alone carried a potential sentence of 25 years to life. But the details, the gaps in procedure, the prior release, they all hung over the case like a shadow. In the weeks after his arrest, Adam appeared in court for the first time. He stood in the defendant's box, wearing the blank expression that survivors of abuse know too well, a mask that hides calculation, not remorse. Reporters noted how he avoided eye contact with the gallery, how he said little, letting his attorney speak for him. The prosecution's opening statements were deliberate. They laid out the timeline: the October 4th assault, the arrest, the rapid release, the protective order, and finally the October 5th killing in front of her children. They described the bulletproof vest, the ultimate symbol of a woman living in fear, and how even that could not stop the violence. For the jury, the case was not just about a killing. It was about intent. The prosecution needed them to see that Adam had made a choice to track her down, to ram her car, to fire 3 shots, and to leave her bleeding with her children screaming in the back seat. The defense, as expected, pushed back. They hinted at a crime of passion, a spur-of-the-moment decision born from rage, not premeditation. They tried to frame the events as unpredictable, as something no one could have foreseen. But every piece of evidence told a different story. Witnesses recounted what they saw on Shawnee and Richlawn. One neighbor described hearing the distinct sound of a shotgun and then seeing Adam walk back to his truck without haste. A bystander told the jury about pulling the children from the car, their small bodies shaking, their eyes wide with shock. Then came the technical evidence. Surveillance footage showed the moments before and after the shooting, the truck's approach, the collision, the figure stepping out with a weapon in hand. Forensic analysis confirmed that the damage to Keaira's car matched the impact from Adam's truck. Ballistics tied the shell casings at the scene directly to the shotgun found in his possession. But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from the child who had been old enough to understand what was happening. In a courtroom that was silent except for her voice, she told the jury what she saw that day. She described the sound of the gun, the way her mother stopped moving the way Adam left without looking back. Her words cut through the legal arguments, stripping the case down to its human core. In the gallery, Keaira's family sat through every moment. They listened as the assault from the day before was described in clinical detail. They heard about the protective order. They relived the hours when they thought she was finally safe, only to wake up to the call that she was gone. Outside the courtroom, the case drew attention far beyond Buffalo. Advocates for domestic violence victims pointed to it as proof that existing laws and procedures were not enough. How could a man arrested for a violent attack on his wife one day be free to kill her the next? How many warning signs had to be ignored before the law took action? Day after day, the prosecution built their case. They brought in officers who had been on the scene, forensic experts who explained the evidence, and family members who testified to the fear Keaira had been living with. They painted a picture that was both devastating and undeniable. The defense had little to counter with. There was no disputing that Adam had been at the scene, no disputing that he had pulled the trigger. Their arguments about impulse and lack of planning rang hollow against the chain of events laid out by the state. When closing arguments came, the prosecution's words were clear and direct. This was not an accident, not a moment of uncontrollable rage, but a deliberate act by a man who had been given every opportunity to be stopped, and wasn't. The jury deliberated for just about an hour. That was all it took. They returned with a verdict, guilty on all counts. For Keaira's family, it was a moment of mixed emotions. Justice in the legal sense had been served, but the outcome could never match the loss. They would leave the courthouse without her, just as they had since that morning in October. Sentencing came in December. The courtroom was tense, filled with both supporters of the victim's family and observers from the public who had followed the case from the start. Adam was given the opportunity to speak, but when he tried, the judge cut him off. Witnesses described the exchange as sharp, almost confrontational. At one point, the judge ordered him removed from the courtroom altogether. The sentence was the maximum allowed, 25 years to life in state prison for the murder conviction, along with concurrent sentences for the other charges and fines totaling $8,000. The judge's words were blunt. The acts were cold, calculated, and in full violation of the court's previous orders. Outside, cameras captured Keaira's family embracing, some weeping, others simply staring at the ground. There was no celebration, just the quiet reality that justice, while necessary, does not heal the wound left behind. Even after the verdict, the case was not truly closed. The wrongful death lawsuit filed by Keaira's estate against the town of Cheektowaga and its police department moved forward. It alleged that the system's failure to hold Adam after his assault arrest directly led to her murder. For many in the community, this suit became as important as the criminal conviction. It was about accountability, not just for the man who pulled the trigger, but for the structures that allowed him the chance to do it. The trial, the verdict, the sentence, they answered one question. Would Adam Bennefield be punished? The lawsuit asked another. Could the same thing happen to someone else tomorrow? Keaira's name became a rallying cry. Her story, repeated on news broadcasts and in advocacy meetings, was used to push for changes in how domestic violence cases are handled, how protective orders are enforced, and how victims are kept safe in the hours and days after an abuser is released. But for those who loved her, the public fight could never erase the private loss. Her children would grow up without her. Her family would carry the memory of those days. The October morning when she believed she might finally be safe, and the morning after when everything ended. In the end, the courtroom delivered its verdict. The prison gates closed behind Adam Bennefield. And yet, the question of whether justice had truly been done remained open, lingering in the silence he left behind. In the months after the sentencing, the grief didn't fade. It settled in, a permanent presence in the lives of those who love Keaira. Her absence was felt in the small moments. A missing voice at family dinners, an empty seat at birthday parties, the silence in places where she used to laugh the loudest. Her children, too young to fully understand, carried memories of that morning. For them, the loss wasn't a headline. It was the reality of waking up each day without their mother. In church services across Buffalo, her name was spoken in prayer. Pastors called for protection for victims still living in fear, for stronger laws to prevent another tragedy like this. Some spoke of forgiveness, the idea that letting go of hate could bring peace. But for her family, forgiveness was not something that could be forced or rushed. They weren't ready to absolve the man who had taken her life. The aftermath brought more than mourning. It brought action. Community groups rallied around her story, using it to push for reforms in how domestic violence cases are handled. Survivors came forward, saying they saw themselves in Keaira's situation, trapped between fear of leaving and fear of staying. But there were also moments that shocked even those closest to her. On social media, people noticed that Adams still had supporters, individuals who minimized his actions, who posted in his defense, who claimed the system had been too harsh. For the family, those posts were a fresh wound, a reminder that not everyone saw the crime for what it was. And yet, even in that painful mix of grief and controversy, there were signs of resilience. Her sister, Montacia, became one of the most vocal advocates for victims' rights in the city, speaking openly about the failures that led to Keaira's death and demanding accountability from law enforcement and the courts. The wrongful death lawsuit pressed forward, forcing public agencies to answer difficult questions. Each hearing, each filing, kept Keaira's name alive in the public conversation. Her story had become bigger than the crime. It was now a warning, one that echoed in every police briefing, every domestic violence shelter, every courtroom where a victim's safety hung in the balance. And while her family continued to navigate life without her, they held to the hope that telling her story, fully, truthfully, and without compromise, might save someone else from the same fate. Because the tragedy of October 5th wasn't just what happened to Keaira Hudson. It was that everyone who could have stopped it didn't. Keaira Hudson's story is more than the record of crime. It's a reminder that protective orders are only words on paper unless they're enforced, that danger doesn't disappear when the handcuffs come off, and that ignoring warning signs can cost a life. She did everything she could to survive. She asked for help. She wore a vest. She told people she was afraid. And still, she was left exposed. The man who killed her will spend decades behind bars. But the deeper question remains. Will the system change before another mother's children watch her take her last breath? Be careful who you trust. Not every smile is safe. Comment below. Was this preventable or inevitable? And if you believe her story should never be forgotten, share it. Rest in peace, Keaira Hudson.